as Cathy said, I've been living in Finland a long time, and over 25 years now, and have been skiing here for all those years. That's mainly been Nordic track skiing. I live down in the south, and that's most of the skiing that is good down here. But during the COVID times, the last couple of years, I had the opportunity to do a little bit more skiing locally up in Lapland, up in northern Finland. So that's about 1,000 kilometers north of where I live. And I realized how good it is. If you're looking for spectacular, steep, magnificent mountains, you're not going to find it in Finland. But what you do find is a lot of skiable terrain, and huge areas of wilderness of the sort that you don't find in Central Europe and the UK. So it is an interesting area to visit. And as far as I'm aware, that there has never been a Eagle Ski Club trip to Finland. I had a quick search through the journals, didn't find anything. I think one or two people have finished their trips in Finland. I think Declan and Philippa and Howard did that last winter. But anyway, there's plenty to ski in Finland. So I will now try and share my screen, which I hope somebody could tell me or put a thumbs up if they can see.
Yes, we can see. That looks good.
Good. Okay, great. So I can shift the slides by. Yes, doing that. So just to set the scene where Finland is and what is Finland. Just for the sake of interest, I'm talking from down here in the southwest. This is where I live. Most of the skiing is up in the top third. That's Finnish Lapland. Although that said, there are ski resorts over the entire country. There's around 75 ski resorts in Finland, and the entire country is usually snow covered for at least a couple of months of the year. Even where we are down in the southwest, we have snow on the ground usually for 2 or 3 months at least. And up in the north, that can be easily over 200 days of snow on the ground. So, for example, the first ski resorts in Finland opened about a month ago, and there is skiing up there now. That's mainly on snow that was kept from last year, but there is fresh snow on the ground. It has been snowing up there. So Finland is a skiing country, a long history of skiing. I think the earliest ski that's been discovered was about 3,000 years old. Skis have been used to move around the country. And I took this photograph at a school in Lapland, showing that the kids still these days do ski to school. These are all the kids' skis leaning outside the school door, which is great. And people all over the country ski. A lot of Nordic track skiing, but there is plenty of downhill skiing at the ski resorts, and a fair amount of backcountry skiing, which is getting more popular, backcountry and side country. So I'll focus mainly on, as said, on Lapland. And Lapland is large, roughly, let's say 100,000 square kilometers, so significantly larger than Scotland, with only a population of only about 170,000 people. So there's vast area and few roads. There's vast areas of wilderness. That said, in the season, the ski resorts are quite popular. Many people travel from the south, and many of the biggest ski resorts are actually quite popular with Brits, particularly with British families. It's a good place to go if you have perhaps some non-skiers in the group, or who only want to piste ski or do other activities, Nordic skiing, but also things like dog sledging, husky rides, reindeers, visits and snowmobiling and the like. So it is quite popular from that perspective. And I'm going to try and avoid sounding like the Finnish tourist board. You know, it's not it's not nirvana for skiing, particularly if you, and I'll come to the climate, it can be challenging, particularly in the early part of the winter. I'm going to describe skiing in maybe 4 areas. First of all, up in the arm of Finland, which reaches out towards Norway. That's Kilpisjärvi, that's where the highest ground is. An area called Pallastunturi and Ylläs and Pyhätunturi, all of which are in Lapland. But first of all, when to go? So obviously in Lapland, most of it's north of the Arctic Circle, which means that in midwinter, late December, early January, the sun doesn't even get above the horizon. So you may think that would be a little bit off-putting, but actually it is an absolutely magical time of year to visit, well, northern Scandinavia or northern Finland. There is light for around 4 to 5 hours per day, and particularly in the morning and afternoon, you have this incredible sort of blue light. It's very difficult to describe, but it is a wonderful light, and there is enough light to ski. You also have the advantage that in midwinter you have quite good possibilities to see the northern lights if the sky is clear. The disadvantage is that it can be quite cold. When I've been up there, it hasn't usually been too cold. Let's say around -10, -12, something like that. Can be warmer, can drop down to -20 first thing in the mornings. If you're unlucky, you could be looking at something like -30. And just for a reference point, the lowest temperature ever recorded in Finland was -51.5 in 1999. So it can get very chilly, but usually it's not too bad. So, and as I said, in midwinter, there is still enough light to ski and ski tour. This picture was taken, I think, on Boxing Day last year when I was up there. You can see the sun isn't, we're probably around 700 or 800 meters here. The sun is not quite on the horizon, but it's close. So we're a couple of 100 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, and it does give enough light to ski. Correspondingly, when you go in the spring, let's say mid-March onwards, right through to May, perhaps even into early June in some parts, of course, there's plenty of light, and by late May, you've effectively got 24-hour daylight. So there is a very long ski season, and some people do make full use of it and ski hundreds of days per year. So I'll talk first of all a little bit about this area, Pallas. It's a national, one of the many national parks up in Finnish Lapland. There is a small ski resort there. It's basically just a hotel and a couple of lifts, but it has quite easy access. You can drive up to the hotel, which is more or less on the tree line, and then you have quite extensive areas of fells. Ski resort. I'll just see if I can use this pointer, which you might be able to see, hopefully. So Pallas is here, and there's quite an extensive area of fells here to ski on from the resort, possibly even multi-day trips using a couple of huts that are around there. And then there's a number of fells south of the access road here, which also provide some short but interesting ski trips, ascents in the sort of 200, 250 meter range, something like that. So yes, so this is Pallas. This was, I think, sometime last spring. The snow conditions on these more exposed tops can be a little bit Scottish, I would say, that it can be quite wind blown. There's usually enough depth of snow by early winter that you're not troubled by too many rocks, but the snow can be a bit wind blown. Alternatively, on some aspect, you can often find some quite nice snow to ski in, and particularly later in the spring, you end up with spring snow conditions. On this trip, we skied up to a top called Taivaskero, which was the site from which the Olympic flame was lit to start its journey to the Helsinki Olympics in 1952. There's a plaque there to commemorate that. And from here you have one, well, first of all, looking north, you can see the sort of terrain here, fells with drops down of around 300 or 400 meters down to the surrounding forested areas, and lines of fells further up to the north, which you can ski between, and there are networks of huts and ski tracks there that people do use in winter. But from Taivaskero, you can descend towards the east into a sort of large bowl or gully called Pyhä Kuru. This is Pyhä Kuru. You'll have to excuse my Finnish pronunciation. I know the Finns who might be listening to this will be laughing at me. But this is probably one of the longest ski descents in Finland. You're going from around, I think it's around 800 down to perhaps something like 250 meters in altitude. It's quite steep, up to around 40 degrees in places, certainly over the high 30s, and it is quite avalanche prone, as it's on the east side and on the lee side from the westerly wind, so it does have to be treated with a bit of caution. But if it's in good condition, it gives a great ski down, and then you can ski around on a track through the forest and back into the basically the car park. So it makes a pretty nice day tour. This is looking back up the upper slopes of Pyhä Kuru, and there are a number of lines and aspects you can take depending on what the snow might be like. There's a number of tops in the area where you can get pretty nice skiing, so you can often combine a number of tops in the day. This was also last spring when there'd been some fresh snow, and we just did some nice laps on a small hill going up and down around something like 150, 200 meters, and put in a nice set of tracks, which gave us some good skiing. This is looking back at the Pallas Massif, for want of a better word, from a hill called Lomoltunturi. This gives a nice short day tour, and it is typical of the terrain that you'll find. So you will start off by skiing through a Siberian spruce forest. They're usually not too dense, although it does help if you can find a track or path to follow. And then the trees start to thin out, and then you end up with these sort of bald hills above, and then you can do either laps or ski down and go on to another hill and make a loop with several tops in the day. This is, I think, a little bit more in winter. The trees have this. There is a particular technical term for these trees which are covered in this caked snow like this, and of course I've forgotten it right now. I know I remember the Finnish word, but that's not going to be too much help. But it does make the landscape quite magical, skiing through this sort of petrified forest almost of Siberian spruce. Moving on to one of the other major areas in Finland, this is based around the ski resort of Ylläs. It's one of the most popular and biggest ski resorts in Finland. I've taken this map from a skimo competition, ski mountaineering racing competition that I did there 3 or 4 years ago, just because it illustrates the terrain quite well. There are a small cluster of hills with ski slopes, that's these things on either side. And with a bit of care, you can actually make quite a nice day tour, quite a long trip actually, perhaps total ascent of around 1,500 meters or so, with a bit of side country, dropping down off the back of the hills, back up again, and putting together several tours, several ascents and descents, and that's before moving on to the other hills which are located around here. The village here, Akaslompolo, has all services, reindeer, husky rides, snowmobiling, anything you want to do. So it is quite popular for families and keen skiers. The snow conditions can be quite good for off-piste skiing here. And this gives a couple of pictures here, just showing again the type of terrain that you're accessing. So trees, skiing through trees, and then up onto the more exposed tops with relatively short ascents and descents. I think this photograph was taken on during the skimo race competition that we did there. I will come to it later, but I should say that all of these ski resorts and large parts of Lapland have excellent Nordic track skiing. There are literally thousands of kilometers of Nordic ski tracks, all very well maintained. So if people are interested in doing that or combining that with regular skiing or ski touring, it's a great destination for that. Moving then a little bit further south towards what could be called the capital of Finnish Lapland, which is a city called Rovaniemi. There is a quite or very well known ski resort called Pyhätunturi. This has been marketing itself as a sort of Finnish Jackson Hole or Finnish Chamonix, however you want to call it. So they've been pushing the off-piste skiing, lift accessed, and also ski touring that can be done from Pyhä. There's actually 2 resorts relatively close to each other, Luosto and Pyhätunturi. There's cross-country tracks going between them. You can also ski along the ridges of the fells between the two, which is around it's around 30 kilometers or so, and gives a pretty nice outing. And Pyhätunturi itself has some quite steep terrain. There's a couple of passes that cut through the fells, the sides of which are quite steep. One side of which I believe is now protected. You're not allowed to ski there, but the other at the right time of year you can ski into. And it does give some pretty nice ski terrain, so you can ski from the resort, drop down and go up onto these further fells, drop down again, back up again, and make a pretty nice day tour. Or, as said, link on a longer trip. You can link between these two ski stations. Just checking the time. Okay. Moving beyond this sort of let's say ski resort or close to road ski touring, day touring, there are massive opportunities for more wilderness-based skiing. As I said, Finnish Lapland has huge areas of wilderness, very few roads, very few habitations, and you can walk or ski for days across territory where you won't cross a road and won't come across any habitation. This is where I have to confess that I haven't actually done any of that sort of skiing yet in Finland. It is sort of on the plan. I'm not a big fan of pulling pulks or carrying very heavy rucksacks, especially on the flat. So I do need a little bit of convincing that that it's a good idea. But one of these days, I do intend to get round to it. Having more in the last couple of years, discovered that hiking in Lapland in the autumn is absolutely wonderful, and realised what the wilderness in northern Finland is like. So it would be time to explore it on skis, and maybe I think there's some chances to put together a club trip for that sort of expedition sometime. So what I've done is borrow a couple of pictures from friends and acquaintances who've done such trips. One here from a friend, Petri, who did a traverse of Finland, which is around 330 kilometers from the Russian border, in a place called Juusepi, over to the town of Muonio on the Tornio River, one of Europe's great rivers, which is on the Swedish border. I believe that Petri told me that was an 11-day trip. You cross around 4 roads in that time, mix of ski tracks and through virgin territory, and a mix of camping, staying in small huts, crossing lakes, and obviously it seemed sheltering under a tarp. And this is the sort of small cabins that you do come across. There are a number of, I wouldn't say quite a network of cabins in Finland, but certainly in some of the national park areas, they're relatively well equipped with cabins, some of which are open and you can use, anybody can use, others which you need to reserve or get a key for. This one does look a particularly simple sort of cabin, but no doubt better than sleeping under a tarp, I assume, Petri. The sort of equipment that people use on these trips may not be very familiar to, I think, most of us, most British-based, indeed any Alpine-based ski tourists. So skis in Finland have been for hundreds, if not thousands of years, have been a tool to get around in the forest in winter, to hunt, and to travel. This is me on the left holding a pair of, I don't know, something like 2.5 meter traditional skis. They call them forest skis, and they're long, quite broad, used with wax, or possibly modern ones have fish scale bases, sometimes small skins now. And they're often used with the sort of footwear you can see here on the right, which is basically a rubber boot with a sort of slight toe, which sometimes fits into a cable binding. And you can use them, they're very warm, very practical, and they're often used with a felted wool liner, so they're extremely warm in the sometimes extremely cold temperatures that you can have there. I have no idea what they're actually like to go downhill on. I suspect very poor, that you just go in a straight line until you hit a tree or an incline and then come to a stop. But perhaps one of the Finns will correct me on that. But Petri told me that the skis he used on his Traverse of Finland trip were 2.8 meters long. That's 2.8, not 1.8, and 70 centimeters wide. 70 millimeters wide. So I suspect they don't turn particularly easily. Okay, moving now to the area in which has the highest fells in Finnish Lapland. This is in the arm of Finland, which goes right up to the Norwegian and Swedish borders, and is close to a village called Kilpisjärvi, which is almost on the Norwegian border and actually quite close to the well-known skiing destination of Lyngen in northern Norway. This has a pretty remote area, although it is a relatively popular ski destination in the spring, because it has the highest point in Finland, which is Halti, just over 1,300 meters. I say it's the highest point and not the highest summit, because the actual summit is, I believe, about 50 meters away in Norway. So somehow Norway didn't let Finland have the actual highest summit, unfortunately. But it is quite an effort to get there. It's from the Finnish side. It's about a round trip of something like 110 kilometers, and would be often done in something like 5 days, skiing with usually skiing with pulks. There are a network of huts you can use. People alternatively camp, at least in some of the places. There is a steady gain up to the area of Halti, and then it becomes much steeper towards the end. But there's a lot of fells in the area, and people do also go in there to do backcountry skiing, down at ski touring, let's say, or free skiing, however you want to put it. Sometimes you can get certain times of the year in the winter, you can get a lift in. Locals will give you a lift in on a snowmobile. That's both good and bad. It gives you access, but of course it does mean there are occasionally noisy snowmobiles taking skiers in there. And there are some quite long descents, I think vertical in excess of 500 meters, and some quite steep terrain as well. And to a certain extent, I think people are still exploring that and finding some of the best places for skinning and skiing. And I have friends who do go in there, set up a camp, and do day trips from a camp. So yeah, and there's plenty of opportunity for big skiing, remote skiing adventures there. Further away from Halti, there's a number of other summits which are over 1,000 meters. You can cross through into Norway, and I think that's what Declan and Philippa and Howard might have been considering doing from their trip last year. But you can certainly put together some quite adventurous and remote trips in that area. Just keeping an eye on the time. So I'm just going to say a couple of words about the Nordic track skiing. I think I said earlier, there's thousands of kilometers of tracks all over the country, especially in Lapland around the ski resorts. They're all free to use, they're very well maintained. And if you do go up there, I would recommend trying it. It's a great, if you haven't tried it, it's a great thing to do. Not least, they have these sort of shelters and fireplaces in many places around the tracks, where you can sit and grill a traditional Finnish sausage, which is the thing that many skiers will do. So thoroughly recommended. Just on general information, starting to wrap up. Obviously, getting to Finland from the UK basically means flying. Train or ferry isn't really practical unless you have huge amounts of time. One nice way to do it would be to fly to Helsinki. Then there's a very nice overnight sleeper train you can get from Helsinki or a couple of other cities in the south up to Rovaniemi or Kolari, and these give you good onward access to ski resorts. And I would recommend that. I can show a couple of pictures after this as to what they're like. You can also fly up to Lapland, and in the Christmas period, there may be direct flights because there's a fair amount of families coming to visit Father Christmas in Finnish Lapland. I won't go through these. They'll appear on the YouTube, but there is some avalanche forecasting, online maps. And I did write an article for the yearbook a couple of years ago, which you'll find on the club website. So this photograph just shows the sleeper train arriving at Kolari. You can also take cars up on it, which we do from time to time. Otherwise, it's around 1,000 or 1,200 kilometer one-way drive for us from the south. So doing it by train is pretty nice. The restaurant car they always have, it's very civilized. You can sit and have a beer or a glass of wine or eat. So I would recommend that as a way to travel up to Lapland. Okay, that was the end. Thank you for listening. I think we're going to have questions at the end of Cathy's talk.
So, Kyrgyzstan. This was kind of a rush of blood to the head after COVID trip. Like, we can finally reliably book flights for long distance travel. Let's go somewhere very far away. And it's myself, David Cowell and Rich Emerson. And we just went, hell yes, let's go somewhere remote. So we put in a whole lot of fancy planning, which turned out to be utterly useless and completely irrelevant. Because when we got out there, and we're trying to just go sort of remote skiing rather than doing a traverse or something. When we got out there, they just had a massive front of very warm weather and a lot of rain, and a great deal of the lower snow had melted. The ski resort had been closed in the area. It was pretty grim. So what we did, this is Kyrgyzstan and its various neighbors. We flew into Bishkek and then got hold of a local logistics company in Karakol, nice guy, mountain guide, who organized a driver for us, so 6.5 hours to get across to Karakol. The interesting thing about driving in Kyrgyzstan is their cars, left-hand drive, right-hand drive, whatever, it doesn't matter, whatever you like. Which can be slightly unnerving. It's partly because they buy second-hand cars from Japan, because where else do Japanese cars go, given that Japan drives on the same side as the UK? And it's partly because Kazakhstan, the much bigger neighbor, used to do the same. And then Kazakhstan changed the law to say that you had to, have a car on the correct side of the road. And the Kazakhs all drove their cars to the Kyrgyz border and sold them to any Kyrgyzstani who would take them. So there's this huge amount of mixed cars. Having got to Karakol, we realized that our fancy plans weren't going to work. There wasn't enough snow. The roads were all closed with avalanches. The snow was terrible. We were getting a lot of weird mixed information. And this Jurgalan is kind of the most common free ride area on that side of the country. So I thought, okay, let's just go to Jurgalan as a start. So we got a vehicle, again, it took somewhat more than 1 hour and 15 to Jurgalan, and then we proceeded to pull in to this valley and set up a camp about there. And to position it, this is the beginning of the massif that gives us Kantengri over here, on the border with China. So we got dropped off. The weather continues to be bad, warm, snowing, nobody else in the valley, and moved in carrying a week's worth of supplies, gas and food. And this was the first sign that we were going to have problems. Massive avalanche, right down to the valley floor. Quite tricky to get ourselves over it. Big rucksacks and pulling a load, and hot. Got my jacket pushed up on my elbows, just hot all the time. Set ourselves up a camp in a junction of valleys, and spent the next week living, 3 of us, in this tent, fairly cozy, but beautiful. It did start to clear that evening, and when we got out the next morning, okay, some very deep snow. We decided to go and tour in the valley we'd pulled up the previous day because we'd had a bit of feel for the terrain. So this is our very first climb on the very first day. Gentle terrain, kind of under 30, and Rich stamped one ski. Something happened with his binding, and he literally just picked up one single ski, stamped it down, and triggered the slope. So everything on our right goes. We're standing over here. Everything goes. That's the debris going off back down the valley. And we very cautiously tiptoed our way across the slab to get off it on the other side. And that is the gap where our slab had detached. It's like, okay, this is really treacherous. Of course, the next thing we did is dig a pit and start to investigate. There's no avalanche forecasting, so you're on your own. And yeah, we found all sorts of weak layers in there. It's fairly spectacular. Still got some good skiing, going down cautiously. Got ourselves back to our camp. The weather improved a little bit, although we continued to get fresh snow every night. And moved ourselves out, this is up above the valley where we're camped. And everywhere, spontaneous avalanche, either today or a few days ago, just everywhere. I mean, I've been skiing for 15 years, ski touring. I think I'd heard proper whomping twice in 15 years. We were getting it daily in Kyrgyzstan. So everywhere. Digging pits, trying to judge angles, being very conservative. And we did ski some beautiful snow. I mean, this is beautiful, dry powder. It's some of the nicest snow I've skied other than Utah. This became our playground because it felt short, not too steep, protected by trees. We never triggered another avalanche. So we were doing a lot of loops over here. One day we went exploring up this valley, beautiful, but very flat. So you just end up shooting back down it. We managed one evening with a fire, but most of the time it just started snowing again every evening. So mostly we're jammed up in the tent with a lot of damp gear. The trouble with ski touring, trying to dry skins, gloves, socks, thermals. Yeah. And beautiful snow, but we're having to re-break trail every day to get back up. So we'd break a trail and then we'd do loops off that trail just to, reduce some of the work. And then we were getting weather forecasts via InReach from a friend of mine. And we got the storm 50 centimeters overnight and not a gust of wind. It fell straight down. This beautiful, dry, clean powder. I mean, on one hand, it was a nightmare because we were having to dig out the tent and everything. This is trying to get water from the stream to cook with, just everything. There's snow everywhere. And then we had to break trail in the stuff to get any skiing done. So hard work, and we're still being very cautious, but we got some beautiful skiing down through the trees. We just couldn't go very steep, which was a shame. So yeah, that was this week. Just endless trail breaking, beautiful snow, conservative slopes, beautiful valley, lots of terrain, and yet, yeah, avalanche. And on the left-hand side, there are our tracks on our little playground. And yeah, all of this stuff just went spontaneously. It was wild, the whole place. And that's another one. Skiing in the afternoon, looking across the valley, that entire slope went spontaneously, sort of 2 in the afternoon. So running out of food and kind of being a little tired of being sort of trapped in our little safe space, we pulled out at the end of the week. It was still snowing. So we had to break trail all the way back down the valley to get out. Got ourselves back to Karakol. Had a few days in Karakol. They have a very smart statue of Lenin. It's all quite old school. Turned our nice Airbnb into a ski workshop. We bought that iron. We're not using the Airbnb iron to re-wax our skis. And like, now what do we do? So previously we were there. Most of the roads into the mountains are now closed by avalanches. So in the end, we took the simplest thing we could think of, which was this valley was open, sort of. And we thought we'd be able to ski on both sides. So that's what we went for. This is the so-called road that was open. We've just been dumped on the side of the road. We decide to cross the river and set up our camp on the other side. Couldn't find a snow bridge, but the other side had 2 things. It had an outhouse, which was nice, and it had this hut. And it's a shabby hut, but still, it meant we didn't have to be forever cross-legged in the tent and hunched over. Just being able to sit upright was a relief. The fire didn't work so well though, but just being able to sit up did help. The weather was beautiful. We now have a week of sunshine and the temperature jumps 15 degrees. So it's also difficult. It's just different. This time we managed to get up high into some beautiful high bowls. We finally got right up onto the crests and we're looking, onto the main range and towards Kantengri. Digging pits everywhere we go. Still unstable snow, not quite as bad. We did get to ski some lovely lines and some steeper lines because it was a little more stable. And particularly Rich was very good at finding powder. The northwest aspects were still holding powder. And we did find some beautiful snow, but only in places. And the rest of it, spring snow didn't happen. It went straight to crust and glue. So we got ourselves into some beautiful remote valleys. We found some strange things in those remote valleys. We got ourselves, up some peaks and found some big cornices and some interesting cols and so on. Got some great views towards the main range. But the fact remains that for a little bit of good snow high up, 3/4 of it was going to be breakable crust. There were still spontaneous avalanches. And at the bottom, it was glue. And you had to traipse through the glue to get back to the campsite. Also, the snow was melting. Literally day by day, we could see more exposed forest, more ground coming through. And as we sort of finished the obvious valleys, it became harder and harder to get up into the valleys, to try and get to the good snow high up. And it just got hotter and hotter. So towards the end of this week, we're beginning to feel kind of frustrated by this, sort of had enough of this valley and the heat. We did take one sort of pseudo rest day and toured straight up the valley floor. And at the top of it, we found unexpectedly a meteo station with Kyrgyz meteorologists who only spoke Kyrgyz and Russian. And they were very surprised to see us, but they were very nice. And they gave us lunch, and they gave us vodka with lunch. And it was quite fun. But the fact remains, after a week here, we'd had enough. We were ready to leave. And I have to say, of the whole experience, I mean, Kyrgyzstan is lovely. I recommend you visit in summer, not in winter. We talked to local ski guides in the course of these 3 weeks. And they told us, oh yeah, all the Eastern European, Russian, and Asian Stan country ski guides come to Kyrgyzstan for their avalanche training because our conditions are so crap. Like, okay, thanks. It would have been nice to know that before we went. So we weren't just unlucky. They are known for having some fairly spectacular avalanche risk conditions, which is kind of why they don't actually have much of a free ride ski or ski touring culture. It's quite limited and you need to be careful. So, despite the fact that I know Dave has gone there 5 times, I think it's a lovely country. Go in summer, hike, mountain bike, and if you want to ski, apparently Kazakhstan is nice, or Georgia, or even Tajikistan. So that's my story. Do we have any questions from anyone, either for myself or for Dave? Yes, Dave, you're going to tell me that Kyrgyzstan is wonderful and I got it all wrong.
No. I just wondered, what was the height range within which you were operating? You know, like from what height to what height were you actually operating at?
That's a very good question. I've gone completely blank. I think we were going up to about 3,000.
Okay.
We certainly weren't particularly worrying about altitude sickness.
Yeah.
Didn't feel it very much.
Yeah.
And I mean, we were in the region where they, you know, they do what free ride, guided free ride skiing they do.
Yeah. 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 I think that might account for the differences in our experiences to some extent, in that we started at Chirac at about 3,500 meters and went up to about 5. So there was a big height difference, I think, there. Which
I think we
got some wumping, you know, we got some wumping, but it's 10 years or more ago. So climate change has definitely affected it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's like here, it's getting warmer and it's getting more extreme.
Yeah.
It's either super cold and then suddenly you get a massive warm front and then it rains on your very cold snow. So yes, I think later in the season, but just talking to the ski guides, even they, it was a big deal when they got to ski a 35-degree couloir. You know, they've been watching it for weeks. And I'm like, we do that daily in the Alps and the Pyrenees. You know, sometimes it's worth staying at home and skiing. Yeah. All right, let me pick up a question from Paul Cooper. Political situation there, issues in neighboring countries. It's fine. I mean, the border to China is more or less closed. We got there just as the war started, you know, the war in Ukraine. So they were all frantically trying to turn their money into dollars, which I think turned out to be a bad idea because the ruble didn't tank and everyone was very confused. So yes, all I got was they were very confused about Ukraine and what it meant for them. There's a little bit of conflict with Tajikistan. There's a sort of very low-level border war that flares up occasionally. But Kyrgyzstan itself is easy to get to. You fly with Turkish Airlines. They have a very generous luggage allowance. They're a nice airline. And yeah, once you're there, it's actually reasonably easy to move around. Right. Any other questions from anyone on Kyrgyzstan or Finland? I do owe a quick apology to some of you. Right, Declan, I'll get you to just to say, I know some of you battled to get in, and that was my fault. On the reminder post, I put the link for the next webinar for Greenland. So that's why it seemed a bit odd. Declan, yes.
Hi, Cathy. Dave, just wanted to say thanks for kicking off the winter webinar series. Yeah, it sharpens the appetite. Certainly like to go back to Finland, Dave. You've got unfinished business, I think, there. And you haven't quite put me off Kyrgyzstan. Interesting snow, but do you think, speaking with the locals, were they freak conditions or is that the norm?
They seem to think it was relatively normal, at least in modern times. And yeah, I mean, honestly, they were like, yeah, go to Kazakhstan. Snow's better in Kazakhstan. And the, talking to the guys who were working as ski guides, like it's a minor part of their guiding business. It's a month, they run free ride camps, but the free ride camps turn out to be on 25 degrees. And frankly, it's about cultural, it's about staying in a yurt and eating good Kyrgyz food more than actually pushy free ride powder skiing. And yes, this thing about all the guides who do the sort of Central Asian training, which is cheaper, I think, than our Western training, all come to Kyrgyzstan, including the Russian guy who used to be part of the Eagles. He recently got his qualification. And yeah, he went to Kyrgyzstan because they have, such challenging avalanche conditions. And he was just outside Bishkek. And he said the same. He posted photos of all the spontaneous avalanches and of all the weak layers in the pack and so on. So it's not just us. And I don't think it's just bad luck. It's certainly something to take into account.
Okay. Cheers. Thanks, Cathy. Thanks, Dave.
Christine?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was quite interesting for me to watch it. I lived in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan for 2 years in the 90s. And in the winters, I skied every weekend and I've done some 5-day expeditions. But most of my skiing was actually in Kazakhstan. And it was almost the most wonderful powder. And we hardly ever had any avalanches. It really didn't seem to be an issue. So it was such a shame that, what you experienced, because I had quite a different aspect. But what was interesting was at the end of each season, I remember one day in particular, you wasn't sure when the end of the season was coming, and it did come extremely quickly, almost over, within hours. And I remember going up one mountain and we were going up on really nice snow, and we literally got halfway down and it turned to cement. And we could hardly move our skis. And then you couldn't ski anymore for the rest of the season. And the area where you were skiing, back in the 90s, it hadn't been traveled in very much. I actually ended up going to a place called Narian and buying horses. And a friend joined me, and we rode through the high peaks, and it took us a month to get to Karakol through the high peaks, or through the high passes. And for 2 weeks, we never came below 4,000 meters. And I would have come through the area where you were skiing. So it was interesting for me to watch it. I was never in that particular area in winter, but it is an amazing place to go. I would certainly encourage people to go for the experience of being there. It's a wonderful place to explore.
Sounds like an amazing trip. And yes, we saw a lot of the horses. Still an important part of the culture. The question here from Anna about what about the culture in Kyrgyzstan? What was that like? I think one of the drawbacks of the trip we did, which was kind of to go straight into the mountains, was we didn't get a lot of interaction with the culture. a little bit in Karakol, a little bit talking to kind of local ski guides, but I don't feel like I came away from that as a cultural trip in any sense. And I know David said when they did a crossing in Tajikistan and were moving from village to village, they actually had a more kind of cultural experience than what we were doing. What we did find on the day we drove back out the second time, we stopped at the big animal market because it was the day for it. And it had been raining after snow. And the entire animal market was about this deep in mud and horse shit. So we did not stay very long. But I mean, it was awful. You were literally wading in mud and horse shit. And apparently it went viral. While we were in the mountains, it went viral on social media. And the president of Kyrgyzstan saw it and passed a decree announcing that all animal markets were to have cement floors put down, because it was just such an awful mess of animals. So it was interesting. But apart from that, yeah, I don't know. A comment from Philip about they stayed in yurts run by locals in the same area. And that's a possibility. There are people running free ride ski camps, and you'll be based in a yurt camp. And then there will be a guide who breaks trail, or they'll take you out with snowmobiles up to the top of somewhere and ski you down. But looking at their photographs, they're doing pretty gentle slopes. I'm sure it's lovely powder, but it's not really terribly challenging skiing. But that would be a much more sort of culturally integrated experience. Right. Any last ideas, thoughts from anyone? Dave.
Just in case, following up what Anna said about it can be different. I think one of the advantages we had on all those times that I went in was that road to the gold mine is kept open all winter. So you've got basically road transport up to 3,600 meters, which I think does make a difference, because you're right in the heart of the mountains when you get out of your vehicle then. So, and again, to pick up Chris's point, it was her explorations that pointed the eagles to that range in the first place, basically. So that's how we ended up making those multiple visits.